Hello. Our topic of high blood pressure is one of great importance. People tend to think of blood pressure as being high, since that's the main problem that happens with blood pressure. But right now, before we get into the details of high blood pressure, we should take a look at blood pressure on its own, just whether low or high. That's what forces the blood to go from the heart throughout the whole body. In the person here, let's make a diagram of a person. Diaphragm here. Here's the heart. And out of the heart comes the biggest artery of the body, the aorta. That's going to supply blood to all the body, with branches going to the arms, the head, and very early along here, branches into the heart itself. When the chamber in the heart that pumps the blood gets full, it then pumps, and that quantity of blood from that chamber, called the ventricle, the left ventricle, is pushed out into the aorta. I'll mark that here with an arrow, and it pushes it through a valve here, right at the beginning of the aorta. Let us take a look at that valve. So I'm going to just expand that down here. That valve is a valve that has leaflets that can flop in the direction up and be flat against the wall and let the blood flow through easily. Now, that ventricle pushes the quantity of blood up here into the aorta, and as soon as that ventricle has emptied its quantity of blood, of course it's not pushing anymore with any pressure, but it does have pressure right while it is contracting. So over here we're going to give an idea of what's happening to the pressure in the aorta. So this is blood pressure here being indicated by this line, and over here is time going by. We're starting here from a certain level of pressure, and the heart, the ventricle, pumps with force, and the pressure goes up quickly. Once the ventricle empties, as we said, there's no more pressure and it levels off. Now, when it levels off like that, the pressure actually in the heart goes down to nothing, at zero. The valve now, with pressure up in this area and zero pressure below, these valve leaflets snap back, and this would actually close up so that the pressure that was up here in the aorta pushing down, that blood cannot get back into the heart. You can have zero pressure here, and up here you have the pressure that you achieved with the heart pumping. When that pumping action occurred, the aorta expanded. The aorta is large for an artery. It has a certain diameter, but it's elastic, and when that new blood pumps into it, it expands. More pressure in it, which we showed in our diagram over here. But the blood does go on being pushed into all the arteries of the body, and as it moves, the aorta starts collapsing and the pressure gets less. But that happens gradually, so we're going to show that over here. The pressure goes down, as so. And it would keep going down. It would keep going down all the way to zero, except another heartbeat occurs. When the heart has pushed out all the blood that was in that ventricle, then it goes out again, the valve opening and closing with each heartbeat. Now we give names to these positions or blood pressure levels that occur with each cycle of the heart beating. The highest level here is called systolic, and then the gradual decrease of the pressure is during the part of the cycle in which the ventricle is resting. It's called diastole. The end of that blood pressure during diastole is the lowest point it reaches, and that's called the diastolic pressure. The diastolic pressure is actually at the end of diastole, the resting phase, just like the systolic pressure is at the end of systole, the contraction phase. These two pressures are the important ones that we record. So we put the number that is achieved in systolic, let's call it 120, and we put down, we record the pressure that's achieved at the end of the diastolic phase. The diastolic pressure, we'll put that down here. These are representative numbers, and everybody knows that you have two numbers, and that's what they signify, what we just explained. Now, just thinking for a moment here, after the aorta has just received the blood from the heart, so we're up here at the systolic pressure with the aorta expanded, the valve down here at the beginning of the aorta, the aortic valve, has closed, and now the heart is doing no pumping, and yet the blood is being pumped away because the aorta collapses with the force that it has with the elastic property in its wall. The blood is being forced along the many divisions, the arterial tree, we could call it, all the arteries in the body, and that blood pressure is going down. What's pumping there is not the heart, it's actually the aorta and the other elastic arteries. So one has well said that really the aorta, the big elastic arteries, are like a second heart because they manage the pressure and manage pumping the blood further along. Another feature we want to look at in this issue of the blood pressure changes as the heart pumps, and that is how long is it between one heartbeat here, let's say at the systolic pressure, till the next. This is going to give us the frequency at which the heart is pumping, and of course that, depending on the person, can be rather different, one person different from another. In an average person it might be 70 to 80. In someone who has quite a strong heart, say an athletic person, it might be down in the 50s or even less, 50 times per minute. That frequency, if we were to increase it, if we increase the frequency, we're making the time till the next heartbeat here come sooner. If you have your next heartbeat come sooner, we're starting from a higher pressure. And you're going to go up to a higher pressure. So the frequency of the heart, the pulse rate of the heart, is definitely a factor in blood pressure. What we want to put here is what are the factors making blood pressure what it is. And the first of those that we'll note here is the frequency. Another thing that's definitely involved in the amount of pressure is how big is the volume that's pumped out each time. And so that is called the stroke. Every heartbeat is a stroke. The stroke or the heartbeat volume. And very related to that stroke volume is how much blood is coming back to the heart. Third point, after these first two, the frequency and then the volume of blood that the heart pumps out with each stroke, and the very related total volume of blood that's in your system and coming to the heart. The third point, though, is a bit more complicated to see clearly, and that is how quickly the blood leaves from the aorta, remember the aorta was expanded right at the end of systole, the systolic pressure, it was enlarged and under higher pressure than it was at the beginning of systole. It's enlarged and it's pushing the blood on its way. Now, in pushing the blood on, if you had the aorta suddenly cut off and the blood just went out immediately, then your pressure would drop right off. On the other hand, if the aorta were blocked, the pressure would just stay there. You would keep on at that systolic pressure. So the amount of resistance that is encountered by that pressure in the aorta has very much to do with what your blood pressure is going to be down here at the low systolic pressure. This resistance that's given to the blood is going to depend on how wide open the little arteries are in the body. Peripheral, that means out away from the heart, out in the rest of the body, peripheral resistance. How much the whole system of arteries is resisting the flow that's coming into them. Now, we should think for a minute on this about what would happen if all of the arteries, especially those little ones, changed their diameter. Now, that may seem totally imaginary, but it isn't. The arteries that are small, unlike the aorta, they have a very significant component of not just elastic tissue, but of muscle. And that muscle is controlled automatically, we could say subconsciously, so that the tiny arteries, and here of course we're expanding them to be from microscopic size so that we can now look at it, that muscle could tighten up so the tiny arteries close down. When that happens, you're resisting the flow of the blood from the heart out into the whole network of blood vessels in the body. So you're increasing the peripheral resistance. What does that do to the blood pressure? If you think about it a minute, you'd realize, well, that's going to keep this systolic pressure up high. So the diastolic pressure is going to be high compared to what it would be if there was much easier flow of the blood. If the arteries are open, then that blood can flow through easily, and you've got a lower blood pressure, particularly the diastolic pressure. Want to see what are the effects of some of the things of daily life on our blood pressure. The way that things in life, like stress, people would say, I have a lot of stress, my blood pressure is high. But stress doesn't act directly. It has to act through these things that we've said right here. The frequency of the heart, the volume that the heart pumps out each time, and the blood volume, and thirdly, the peripheral resistance. So the question is, how does stress change those things? And we're going to look at several others to try to understand better what it is that makes blood pressure go high or low. We'll get into that in the next session.